Bush family. Wealthy, powerful, by any measure, a true dynasty. For generations, the Bushes were a hidden force in American finance and politics. Now, they've come out from the shadows. How have they claimed their place at the top of the pyramid of power? The Bushes have given America 2 presidents, and there may be more on the horizon. Do they have the right stuff, or just the right name?
If our current president had a name that didn't end with Bush, would he be in the Oval Office today?
No, he would not.
I don't see how.
No, he would still be hanging out at country clubs.
Absolutely not. He's a Bush, and he's in the White House because he's a Bush.
No way in hell. The fix was in, and that's the only reason he's in the position he's in.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
He's sworn to lead the world's last superpower. In his hands, delicate intricacies of international relations.
I can't name the general.
And it's
General.
and the Prime Minister of India?
The new Prime Minister of India is, no.
A commanding post where words can move armies.
A major U.S. Daily story about subliminal messages. I don't think we need to be subliminal.
It's, of course, common to say George W. Bush is, dumber than a box of rocks. But that misses the point about who George W. is. Yes, he doesn't have the brain muscle to do any heavy lifting, that's clear. But at the same time, that's not his purpose.
I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you. And the people.
What is his purpose, the real agenda?
And the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
September 11 would transform his presidency and the president's image from good old boy to an Abe Lincoln, protector of the American Republic.
In the days, really the minutes before 9/11 erupted, his popularity was headed south. He was seen as an absentee president, and people were challenging his intellect. All of that was welling and coursing around in the weeks building up to 9/11, and all of it was promptly forgotten.
It's that real strong leadership that comes through, and people just always recognize that he was a natural leader.
He is an honest, equitable, hard-working man, and that's why we've supported him unequivocally. And I think he's doing a fabulous job.
After the September 11 attack, his popularity soared, and few were willing to ask questions about how he arrived at the pinnacle.
I've been tracking the Bushes for years. In politics, power, profits, these guys are the grandmasters of the game. I'm still on their trail. Texas, Florida, Washington. What drives these powerful men? And where are they driving us?
It is important for people in the world to hear that should I threaten our national security interests, there will be reprisal.
Victory in Iraq cements George W. Bush's image as heroic warrior. An image painted forever in the public's mind by this landing on the deck of the aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln. The president makes much of his days as a fighter pilot at the time of the Vietnam War.
Because of you, our nation is more secure. Because of you, the tyrant has fallen and Iraq is free.
Did you see him landing the jet on the Abe Lincoln?
I thought that was one of the neatest things I had ever seen. And watching all of the soldiers on that deck with their commander-in-chief, and then having him wade in and having just seeing that interaction, I just thought that was fabulous.
It was a cheap political stunt. It was not his airplane, it was the taxpayers' airplane. They had to get the aircraft carrier to turn around so that they would get the proper view that they wanted for the cameras of Bush landing and standing before the brave troops who had indeed put their lives at risk. George W. has never put his life at risk, not during the Vietnam period. His kids were not at risk in the Iraqi war. This was Bush political operatives using the U.S. military to try to advance Bush's political career.
Here's this politician who didn't have the guts to go do it himself, go out and put on our uniform and go out on our aircraft carrier and grandstand as if he's some type of hero. And I don't think he's a hero. I think he's a phony.
(1968), Vietnam. Young Americans by the thousands were drafted and sent to the jungles for a war without. Even the privileged at George Bush's Ivy League college faced the war draft. And in dorm rooms, discussion turned to the decision to fight or flee. I met with the president's Yale roommates on their way to lunch at the White House with their old friend.
Oh boy, a long time ago. That's the president. It's me. Haven't changed a bit. That's Robert Dieter. All very accomplished golfers, as you can see.
And how come you don't wear a hat?
I don't know. I just don't wear a hat. I want to look different.
I'm always amazed at what I see on the television. That persona and the public one and the scripted one, as opposed to the one that we knew in college and know now, where he's a very down-to-earth, relaxed, witty, funny guy.
So did you talk with your roommate about the war in Vietnam being drafted?
I think so, yeah, as I remember it. The military choice was something that all of us at that point were going to have to face in one way or another.
Mm-hmm. Did you sign up, or did your number come up in the lottery for the draft?
No, I was just planning to enlist because at that time it was just inevitable that you were going to get drafted.
Hey, this is Bob Reddy with your National Guard Hope. And I want to tell you that the story of today's Army and Air National Guard is something all Americans can be proud of.
What Bob Hope doesn't mention is that getting into the Guard is a way to get out of Vietnam. With just 12 days to go before he became subject to the draft, George Bush applies for the Air Guard. Problem for George was there were 100,000 would-be draft dodgers queued up ahead of him.
For George W. Bush to get into the Texas Air Guard, safest unit in the military, he had to take a test. And he scored out of a possible 100, 25. Just 1 point above too dumb to fly. But that didn't stop young George from getting that plum position in the cockpit.
Some folks have referred to it as a champagne unit because if you examine exactly who was in that unit, it seemed to have a higher number of very close friends of George W. Bush who really lived in the same neighborhood, attended the same schools, the same private schools, and frankly very well-heeled, very affluent, many heirs to oil fortunes, or frankly powerful politicians.
To find out how George Bush got the cushy job of defending Houston, Texas from Viet Cong attack, I spoke with a former Air Guard Lieutenant Colonel, Bill Burkett.
Do you think George W. Bush may have gotten some special treatment?
In that case, and in almost every case in dealing with the National Guard, treatment that I would not have received, treatment that other soldiers would not have received. He came into the National Guard under a special favor from the Lieutenant Governor's office. When there was a waiting list, he was put at the top of the list. Being able to have the United States government spend $1 million teaching you to fly. Now that's pretty special treatment. And when you have an aptitude score of 25, and you have people that have scored much higher than that have been on a waiting list for a period of time, and you're automatically elevated to #1 on the list, it would tell you that he got special treatment.
Now, does that mean that he effectively was able to get out of going to Vietnam and getting out of the draft?
Oh, sure. Sure it does. 12 days prior to his student deferment going out. Look, I'm as guilty as anybody. I got into the National Guard for one simple reason. I was scared to go to Vietnam. I'm honest. I'll tell people that. But let's be honest about this. Did he get out of going to Vietnam? Sure he did. It galls me. It literally galls me to see somebody who is a wannabe, an image man, stand and take an image and lace himself in a uniform and try to build that image for a political purpose or something other than something that's real. When a friend of mine died, when friends of mine died, they gave the ultimate sacrifice and they sat in a foxhole and they did so without a name. And their name is only remembered on the Vietnam Wall.
There are 58,000 names on this piece of stone. Some volunteered. Most had no choice about going. But it seems that for a privileged few, there was a special route to safety. George W. Bush's birthday is July 6, 1946. Same as William H. White and 24 others. They went to Vietnam and didn't come back.
We were sent there to defend our liberties. And to find out that the politicians who sent myself and the other young men to put our lives into harm's way were working a personal, selfish agenda instead of a national agenda is anathema to everything that we fought for and stood for. And it hurts me to this day to think that we would be manipulated or that they would abuse their authority. That they'd stand on television in a suit in front of 14 waving American flags or on the flight deck of an aircraft carrier in a flight suit and be called a leader. The whole system has been turned on end. We have the weak leading the strong.
I got my hands on a letter from someone who explained how the draft dodge fix was done. It says, George Bush leaped over thousands of young men, some of whom died in Vietnam. So I tracked down one of the guys named in the letter. He confessed to the whole thing. He said he made the call at the request of someone acting in the name of Congressman George Bush Sr. Not surprisingly, he wouldn't repeat the confession on camera.
That's all it took, the mention of your name, and all my love for you burst into flame.
Midland, Texas. In 1950, a Connecticut Yankee named George Herbert Walker Bush Sr. arrived into town with money bags filled with $1 million from his family to buy himself a piece of Texas. And he ended up with the whole enchilada.
George Bush Sr. quickly parlayed the family's eastern banking wealth into Texas oil gushers. George Jr., with his military career at an end, decided to follow his father into the oil biz. That's when George met David Rosen, Midland oil field wildcatter, a guy who drills holes and takes his chances.
So, David, I understand there's some members of the oil crowd here that are in a special club.
Well,
what's it called?
Okay, there's the Lucky Sperm Club. You know, those that were lucky enough to be born into a family with substantial resources. If you have access to capital through your family contacts, it's very easy to become successful in the oil business.
So this is where it began for our president in the oil business.
That was where I first met George, when he had his company Arbusto.
What does that mean?
I believe Arbusto means small bush. This was George's card that he gave me. And it's really telling that although his name was George Bush Jr., he quickly dropped the Jr. And of course it's George Bush, President, Arbusto Energy.
But Arbusto went busto, as did many of his other oil ventures. So George Jr. switched to the family's other line of work, politics.
See it. I'm George Bush, running for the Congress. I'm George Bush. Nice to see you. Let's make it official. I'm a candidate for governor of Texas.
By 1995, George W. is living here in the Texas White House. He's governor of the Lone Star State, but he wants the bigger house. It's an ambition that's in his blood. But he'd have to know that in a presidential campaign, his war record would come under the microscope.
I've been scrutinized as the son of the president. I scrutinized when I ran for governor in 1994, and I'm darn sure being scrutinized now.
The scrutiny would center on his Air Guard war record. Specifically, did he go AWOL when he was supposed to be on duty at an air base in Alabama? Some Vietnam vets believed he was missing in action.
We're here today to offer a $1,000 reward to anybody who can bring tangible evidence to us, records, showing us that he attended guard duty while he was here in Alabama.
No one's claimed the reward, so where was George?
I think you ought to listen to what the general said, who was in charge of my unit, and he said there was no preferential treatment given.
I took a walk just down the road from the governor's mansion to the building where you'll find all the files on soldiers and airmen.
Camp Mabry, HQ of the Texas National Guard. This is where the Vietnam War records of fighter pilot George W. Bush were supposed to be kept. But someone seems to have tampered with them. Who did it? And how did they cover it up?
This is 28 years of a military career, all boiled down to paper. This is the retirement points. All of these.
But Bush's military records are oddly incomplete. What happened to those papers? Lieutenant Colonel Burkett was working the Air Guard headquarters at Camp Mabry, talking with the general, when a telephone call came in from Governor Bush's people.
They wanted to assemble all of the governor's files. They wanted to make sure there was nothing in there that would embarrass the governor. That's as accurate as I can put it.
And you heard that off the
Yes.
voice box yourself?
Yes.
Now, they wouldn't go along with a call from a politician and actually clean the files, would they?
Yes.
They would?
Yes.
Did they?
Yes. And there were several documents, and I saw that they had George W. Bush's name at the top of it. And this was a bin that was about to be shredded. Specific document that I do remember was a pay document. A second specific document that I remember was a retirement points document. That, in fact, might explain some tremendous gaps in the record. It makes no sense. This was during the Vietnam War, yes. And did he show up for training? There's no documentation at all that he showed up.
Are you saying that the president may have been AWOL, taken off during the war?
If you look at the definition of absent without leave, which is used to court-martial individuals, he met those ramifications of those charges.
Florida, the Sunshine State. Something smells rotten here, and it ain't the orange juice. The Bush family takes back the White House when Florida goes for George W. over Al Gore by a margin thin as the ace of spades. just 537 votes. How convenient that the team in charge of this questionable little count is handpicked by a governor named Jeb Bush.
I would like to introduce to you a man of vision, of principle, my brother, George W. Bush, the next President of the United States.
Good political issue. It's time for new leadership in Washington, D.C.
Florida is a swing state. The result here was expected to decide whether the Republicans or the Democrats took the White House.
It's going to be a close race, very close race, yeah. It's hard to tell. Flip a coin.
I believe America is ready for a new beginning.
It's almost 5:30 a.m. Texas time, and George W. Bush is still asleep, and I'm still speaking to people here in Florida.
The pollsters call Florida as Al Gore's state, but for some reason George W. thinks otherwise. What does he know?
I don't believe that some of these states that they've called, like Florida, I just don't believe that. I don't believe we got enough evidence to be able to call the state. We're doing better than we thought, and but I feel fine.
But America didn't feel fine. The machine ballot count was a shambles, so county officials began a laborious recount by hand.
I think they should just re-elect, start it all over again. Cancel the whole deal that's went on now, and let's vote again.
But with Bush's vote margin evaporating, Governor Jebb's officials halt the recount, saving the election for Bush. Then a tipster told me to check out some funny business. Thousands of black voters were turned away from the voting booths because they were labeled as convicted criminals. But were they? I met with Willie Steen, who, like over 90,000 others, was tagged a criminal not allowed to vote because Jeb Bush's officials said he was a felon.
So, Willie, fess up. Are you a criminal?
No. No criminal at all. Never been convicted of any crime.
But they had you down as a felon, a serious convicted criminal.
Yes, they did, but not me. Wrong person. I've never been arrested in my life, you know. Was in the military for 4 years. Got out of the military, been in the medical field ever since. I mean, you can't even work for a hospital being a convicted felon.
If you, in error, remove even one person from the voter rolls, it's of tremendous significance. We found errors. We were very uncomfortable with the matches on the list. The matches that the state considered a match was not something that we necessarily considered a match. Sometimes the race and even the gender was not a match. We were not comfortable.
How did you feel internally when they said you're a criminal?
Well, for one, I was upset, you know. I was ashamed, you know, with 40 people around. It made me feel real bad.
You feel that that it was particularly bad for African Americans?
I really feel that it was bad, you know, for African Americans. But hey, you know, what can we do sometime? You know, what can we do?
Using some legal snooping techniques, I was able to get into Florida's computers and cracked open the files that named Willie Steen and other black voters as potential criminals.
Thomas Alvin Cooper is convicted in Ohio. He's a white guy. Thomas Cooper of Florida loses his vote. He's a black guy, and he's listed for a date of conviction of his felony, January 30th, 2007. Well, look at that. All it is a people who have names similar to someone who's been convicted somewhere in the United States of a crime. 95% of them are completely innocent, should never have lost their vote. Over half of them are black. Almost every black person voted for Al Gore. The citadel of Florida democracy. Way up there, the office of Governor Jeb Bush and his elections director. This is it. This is where the little caper was carried out, the theft of the American presidency. All those innocent black voters, thousands who lost their vote. Was it just a coincidence? I would have bought that until a little birdie dropped this on my desk. And it would prove to me that the election was signed, sealed, and delivered months before anyone entered a voting booth.
This document, marked secret, is the contract between the state of Florida and DBT Choice Point. The company was paid millions to compile lists of criminals who should be barred from voting and then verify that those lists were correct. But Florida state officials told Choice Point not to bother verifying the lists, despite Choice Point warnings that it could mean thousands of innocent people would end up losing their vote. The documents I've discovered implicate Jeb Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, and this man, Clayton Roberts, director of the Department of Elections. Roberts agreed to be interviewed, but was uncomfortable when I produced the $4 million contract.
We have a statute that says we have to have a private company to do this. We put it out for bid. They got the bid, and I think I'm done with this interview.
Wait, well, let me just show you the contract, if I could, Mr. Roberts. Wait, it says here, right in the contract, that the verification is supposed to be done by DBT, that you paid them $4 million. Don't you? It could look to other people, don't you think, that you paid $4 million to purchase this election for the Republican Party? 95% wrong on the felon list? Mr. Roberts, could you just please answer the question regarding the contract?
In accordance with the laws of the state of Florida, I hereby declare Governor George W. Bush the winner of Florida's 25 electoral votes for the President of the United States.
Katherine Harris was Clayton Roberts' boss, and her boss was Jeb Bush. But she also happened to be chairwoman of the Bush for President campaign and successfully delivered W a victory by just 537 votes.
Now that the votes are counted, it is time for the votes to count.
I wish to point out that our American democracy has triumphed once again.
It is a special day for America. It's a day in which our nation confirms the fact that we trust democracy, a peaceful transfer of power.
Thank you, and may God bless America.
To the corporations that put him into the White House, George W. Bush was an investment that paid off big time. Take that company that came up with the phony felon list, Choice Point. They got it 95% wrong, but they didn't get the boot. They got the big no-bid contracts, including one for $67 million to help Bush fight his war on terror.
And they weren't the only company involved in Bush's election to hit the White House jackpot.
George W. Bush, as governor and now as president, is an absolute corporate wet dream.
Jim Hightower, once the Commissioner of Agriculture for the state of Texas, is now a radio columnist. From inside government and out, he's tracked the Bush family's mix of politics and payouts for years.
I'd trust a wolf to guard my last pork chop before I'd trust the Bushites to guard my liberties. Any fantasy that the boss of a major corporation has can come true if you just put in some money into Bush's personal or political pockets.
Looks powerful, looks invincible. In fact, it's the gravestone here in Houston of what was the largest power corporation on this planet, Enron. Here's something that caught my eye. Bush takes office. Just 3 days later, he signs an executive order that raises the price of electricity in California. Nearly bankrupts that state, but earns these guys billions. Now, why would our president do that?
They're very loyal to each other and to those who are loyal to them. They stand and deliver for those who put money into their politics or into their personal accounts.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
Enron puts in a few $100,000 into Bush's presidential campaign. In the first 5 or 6 months of the administration, it reaps hundreds of millions of dollars in personal benefit.
Here's Ken Lay, who's the CEO of Enron. He delivered hundreds of thousands of dollars to the Bush campaign.
Craig McDonald heads Texans for Public Justice.
This is the power team. They hit the long ball and they can put you all the way in the White House. The payback process is policy. It's appointments and policy. Ken Lay, Enron, the oil cronies got exactly what they wanted out of the Bush administration.
Even before he takes the presidential oath, Bush forms a secret task force, including Enron's Ken Lay, to rewrite America's environmental and energy laws.
He put the very people who funded him in the room to devise a clean air policy. They wrote the policy, he enacted the policy, and the policy was strictly voluntary. Did nothing to clean up the air, yet he touted it as a major accomplishment.
Instead of the government telling utilities where and how to cut pollution, we will give them a firm deadline and let them find the most innovative ways to meet it.
These same funders were sick and tired of trying to play by the environmental rules and regulations. George Bush gave them an environmental clean air policy that any corporation would lust after.
How proud we are to be the #1 state in the country in air pollution.
They took the clean air and the environmental cops off the beat. Ken Lay got almost total, complete energy deregulation out of George Bush.
What did the Bush administration do? It refused to impose price controls, to put a cap on those utility prices, meaning a company like Enron could set its own prices to consumers.
Show me the money. Show me the money.
He was delivering a favor and a policy that the donors who put him in that office wanted.
Consumers in California were being stiffed, and Enron was raking in hundreds of millions of dollars during that period in corrupt profits. So that's a pretty good payback.
But Enron squandered their California windfall in a series of spectacular frauds, which imploded, leaving thousands jobless and pensioners bankrupt. Now, George tried to downplay his links with Enron's Ken Lay and other corrupt bosses.
By far, the vast majority of CEOs in America are good, honorable, honest people. In the corporate world, sometimes things aren't exactly black and white when it comes to accounting procedures, and the SEC's job is to look and is to determine whether or not whether or not the decision by the auditors was the appropriate decision.
Ken Lay, whom George W. fondly called Kenny Boy, was the major campaign contributor to George W. Bush, and they exchanged Christmas cards with each other. Ken Lay was very personal, very close with the Bush family.
I do know that Mr. Lay came to the White House early in my administration, along with I think 20 other business leaders to discuss the state of the economy. It was just kind of a general discussion. I have not met with him personally.
I've gotten my hands on a video of an Enron retirement party for one of Ken Lay's colleagues. It stars both Presidents Bush, more than happy to say a few encouraging words for their family's top campaign contributors.
You have been fantastic to the Bush family. I don't think anybody did more than you did to support George.
Don't leave Texas. You're too good a man. I appreciate your service to our great state. I look forward to working with you to make Texas a better place. Good luck in anything you do. You're a good Texan.
Capitol Hill, Austin, Texas. It's here where George W. made the deals that got him into the White House and where he learned his own particular brand of politics, Texas style. When the deals go down, Texas gentlemen sometimes don't like to get their hands dirty with the details. For that, they have hired guns, the political lobbyists. Across from the Capitol, I found one of Ken Lay's former lobbyists, Andrea McWilliams. She and her husband sell their political connections to the Texas corporate elite. They also rounded up over $100,000 in contributions for George W. Bush's presidential campaign.
And your phone number, please. Okay.
If every person in the United States could meet President Bush, they would understand why we have the level of support personally that we do for the president. He is an honest, equitable, hard-working man, and that's why we've supported him unequivocally. And I think he's doing a fabulous job.
I crossed the hall to meet another lobbyist. Nick Kroll invited me into the back room to show me a different view of the influence game.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, great.
Come on in.
Yeah, great.
Want a cocktail?
Yeah.
Why not? Okay, well, we don't want you to speak ill of us. All right.
Thanks a lot.
Cheers.
Damn fine whiskey. Now, do you ever use that as a mechanism for getting what you want in the legislature?
The second most important, well, third most important tool in politics.
Well, what are the others? Guns and what?
Money's probably number one, but whiskey's a close second.
And what's third?
Love, I guess.
Get our lobby tools ready.
That makes the point. Do you have a few enemies here?
Sure. I'm a minority. I'm a Democrat.
An endangered species, huh?
That's right.
The simple process of getting things done in Texas, how important is cash in getting legislation through?
Well, it's the fuel of politics. I mean, that's how you get people that identify with your views elected. It is probably unseemly in many ways because Texas is like a lot of places, there's no limit. If you're running for a House seat, I could give you $100, $200, I could give you as much, $100,000, $200,000, as much money as I want. And obviously that's going to have some effect on how you treat me.
Say, come on now. You are representing guys like Enron. You're saying that these companies make that type of investment and don't expect a return?
I think some of the donors that you're speaking of, and there's a long list that have traditionally given to what they feel like are business-friendly candidates. And those donors don't necessarily look for any sort of quid pro quo other than the candidate's ideology that they're supporting they know will help change the business environment or the climate for the better.
What I would say about President Bush is that There is no way giving to someone like him is going to influence his decision. There's no quid pro quo.
Sounds like bullshit to me.
So this is kind of the Wild West of campaign contributions?
It is the Wild West.
This is a 45 then.
I don't know if there are any other states that have as liberal campaign contributions. Unlimited, you can give $1 million if you want to give $1 million, or you can give whatever. There's the old saying, money talks and bullshit walks.
And money talks very politely to the Bush family. Not just the campaign cash for George W. and Brother Jeb. There was the $1 billion the U.S. Treasury pumped into Brother Neil's bank, Silverado. And there's Brother Marvin. His investment funds are fattening on contracts for the war on terror. And Poppy, Bush Sr., became the first ex-president to trade his Oval Office connections for cash.
The Bushes are like other American dynasties. The Kennedys, the Rockefellers. They made their millions, then bought their way into political office. The Bushes do the same, but with a twist. They've taken the game to a whole other level. See, the money gets them office, then the office gets them even more money. Call it the Bush cycle. And it's still rolling along.
This is going to be the scene of a lot of real
I went to speak to a man who'd witnessed the Bush family's uncanny ability to turn government service into cash. He'd occupied an inside seat in Washington's spook world during the Reagan-Bush administration. Former National Security Agency man, Wayne Madsen.
It's the nature of the Bush families, particularly Bush Sr., to use contacts made from government service, head of the CIA, vice president, president of the United States, to basically call in favors later on.
Bush Sr. and other former intelligence and political honchos have joined the private Carlyle Group, whose main work is selling arms to the U.S. government and a few dictatorships.
Carlyle uses Senior Bush to make entrees to various government offices around the world, to presidents and prime ministers and kings, sheikhs, emirs, sultans, what have you. But what Bush Sr. gets in return is he's part of these lucrative contracts, and he uses his connections to funnel the money into the Bush family coffers, which finds its way into the Bush campaign machine.
In 1988, George Bush Sr. won the presidency. At this time, a contract was awarded by the government of Bahrain to drill for oil in the Persian Gulf. Surprisingly, it went to a small-time company, Harken Energy, with no experience whatsoever in offshore drilling.
I'm a shackled child, singing the good song of freedom. They've got no pride, they interrupt our grieving. Teardrops dropping for the pain of the world.
I asked investigative reporter Pete Bruton, then with the Houston Chronicle, how this happened.
Harken Oil in Texas gets an offshore contract to drill in the Persian Gulf.
You know, it's a big mystery to everyone. All the analysts, everybody said, how did this happen? Nobody understood why it happened. Why didn't Amoco, why didn't Texaco, Mobil, Exxon, BP, why didn't they get the contract? They had the capital. Harken didn't have any capital. And I found out it was because George W. Bush, the president's son, and our future president, was on the board of directors.
Followed the money trail back to the president's business beginnings in Midland, Texas. Oilman David Rosen knew George W. back then and his operations.
It's hot.
Well, yeah, it'll be over 100 today.
Over 100? Whew. Look at that. That's one big horsey. Smells like Texas, too.
Smells like money to me.
Harkin Oil will suddenly get this contract to drill offshore from the government of Bahrain, from the Arabs. They beat out Amoco Oil. Is that a little unusual?
Well, it's awfully unusual for a small company to get an offshore concession like that.
You think maybe that they picked up the contract because George W.'s father was president of the free world?
It certainly didn't hurt.
George W. had a string of oil companies which failed to find much oil, but somehow managed to make him a millionaire. Now, how did that happen?
He ended up with millions, 4 companies that got quite some large investments. You know about that?
No. I think he made his money with his name and being able to keep moving and keep having people put money into his businesses.
So where did this money come from? You have any idea?
Well, my impression is that the money he got was out-of-town money, and that had he been successful in the oil business, he'd still be in it.
George Bush's oil companies kept punching dry holes, but he always found new investors. Some people have guardian angels. George W. seemed to have guardian sheikhs. Funding seemed to come from the Gulf, Saudi Arabia in particular. The question was, who were they? And did they expect something in return? Were the Bushes too close to the Saudis to see the dangers emerging from that nation?
Oh my God! Oh my God! What happened?
And the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
America's attacked by 15 Saudi hijackers under the direction of a Saudi named bin Laden. I couldn't find a shred of evidence that George Bush knew about the September 11th attack coming. But why didn't our intelligence agencies know?
This document is marked secret and WF, which means it walked its way out of the Washington Bureau of the FBI. It indicates that before the attack of September 11th, agents had wanted to question 2 members of a very powerful family for their connections to a suspected terrorist organization, Omar and Abdullah bin Laden. But the agents weren't allowed to. Now, what makes this family so special that they're protected from investigation?
To find out about the bin Laden's business background in America, I met with Bill White. During the Vietnam War years, Bill was a real fighter pilot. Later, he went into business with a mysterious figure, James R. Bath, who managed the U.S. funds of a powerful Saudi family.
I met many times with Salim bin Laden, Osama bin Laden's older brother, both in business settings and in social settings. Bath had bought a house. We had parties there where a lot of the dignitaries and big business bigwigs would party with the Arabs. So it was like La La Land. These guys drove around in limousines with suitcases full of cash. It was just an amazing...
Are you sure Bath was an agent for the bin Laden family?
I'm sure, beyond a doubt. Bath actually presented me with a copy of a trust agreement, a 1-page trust agreement that was signed in 1976 that appointed him as sole and exclusive representative for the Saudi bin Laden family in the United States of America and all their business ventures.
He also invested in one of his fellow pilots' ventures in the oil business.
Oh, that's right, George Bush Jr. and our Busto. That's correct.
Do you know about that?
Well, I know about it because Jim and I had to provide our personal financials to our lenders. And so I looked at his personal financial, and there, plain as day, it said, our Busto 79, $25,000, our Busto 80, $25,000.
So Bush's oil capital coming from Bath, and Bath's money coming apparently from the bin Ladens. What's going on here?
The money that Bath put into Arbusto was nothing but an extension of this quid pro quo relationship between the Saudi royal family and the Bushes. The Saudi royal family was deathly afraid of the Ayatollah Khomeini and the radical Islamic movement. And so at that point in time, they went to the Bushes and said, look, protect us from the Ayatollah and these radical fundamentalists, and we'll give you whatever you want for your campaigns and to fund your kids' business interests, to fight your secret wars.
There were other connections between the Bushes and the Saudis. Carlyle Group, which hired both George Bush Jr. and Sr., received major funds and work from Saudi royals and the bin Laden family. Now we know not all of them were terrorists. But the question is whether the dazzle of Gulf money blinded the Bushes to real threats. I met with Stephen Push, whose wife Lisa was one of the 3,000 people who died on September 11. He's a spokesman for the victims' families. They have been struggling to open government files on Saudi involvement in al-Qaeda.
Do you feel that the government is doing all they can to fully investigate what happened?
It's been very difficult. The Bush administration originally opposed the idea of doing any kind of investigation whatsoever. One thing that the joint 9/11 inquiry has had difficulty getting declassified is information about Saudi Arabia. And I suspect that that may be part of the reason why the Bush administration is reluctant to fully disclose what they did prior to 9/11, because even after 9/11 they've maintained a very close relationship with Saudi Arabia, and that may be playing some role, or may be coloring the president's judgment in how he's dealing with the problem of Saudi cooperation on terrorism.
Were the Saudis before September 11 given special treatment, shielded from investigation into royal funding of terrorist fronts? For some answers, I arranged to meet with Ron Motley, the world's richest lawyer. He beat the tobacco companies and won billions. Now he's using his winnings to fund an international intelligence network to find out who funded the terrorists.
Saudis, before September 11th, do you think that they were given kind of a free ride, given a little extra slack about funding terrorism?
I believe that. Evidence has been uncovered that in the early summer of 2001, several FBI agents who were tasked with trying to find out how al-Qaeda was getting its money were shut down.
So pressure was taken off the Saudis suspected of backing Osama bin Laden before September 11. Motley represents victims of the attack. I asked him if the Bush administration had gone easy on other bin Laden family members.
How come airlines were allowed to take the bin Laden family out of the United States and away from being interrogated by the FBI? Number one. Number two, we obtained from the Bosnian intelligence services, Sarajevo, a copy of what's called the Golden Chain, which lists al-Qaeda listed their most generous contributors, and it included the bin Laden family.
The Golden Chain document is evidence that in the early days, some members of the bin Laden family were funding al-Qaeda operations in the Balkans.
That document was seized by the FBI and the Bosnian police, and the Supreme Court of Bosnia has authenticated the document.
What does this administration have to fear about a full investigation of terrorism?
I don't know that they do, but maybe they're concerned that some of their friends or some strategic interest might be compromised or revealed to have been sponsors of terrorism.
You follow the money, and you come back to this: oil. Drilling it, funding it, controlling it. You know, this has really been the story of two dynasties: the Bushes, but also the Saudis, including the bin Ladens that backed them. war, peace, terror, war on terror. It's all in the family's business.
When the business of the family is politics, and the politics of the family is business.